Okay. And there it is. Okay. Good morning to everyone and welcome to History Matters. And so does coffee. Today we're talking about the press. There's a lot to say about the press. I'm going to talk a little bit historically speaking about politics and the press. We'll see where we go and what we do as we have this conversation because there's a lot to say. And I would say there's a lot of emotion involved in this too. And I'm not sure where we'll go, but I know where we'll start. But before we start, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. A little sniffly today, so I apologize for the scratchy voice. But I'm very interested in today's topic because my brother was a journalist. So I'm looking forward to hear what Joanne has to say. The chat is already on fire today. So here's how this works. Joanne's going to chat with us for about 30 minutes about today's topic. If you have questions about that topic, please put them down below in the Q&A. I'll be back in about 30 minutes and we'll have a discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Annie. Oh, and I will say, as I always do, um, anyone who is here for the first time, please say so in chat, and you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community, which is a wonderful community. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to say today. Okay, so there are any number of reasons why we could talk about the press. And I know in the semi-recent past, what happens in these episodes is I speak and then we come up with a great topic and I'm like, yeah, I'll have to do that. And then something else, surprise, comes up during the week, and then that ends up not being the topic we talk about. But this week, two things happened that made it impossible, in a sense, not to talk about this topic. And I don't know how widespread these things were known. I'm just going to mention them both. The first thing that happened was in what I believe is a blog from the New York Times, written by Michael Gold, reporter. So, what the Times published said, and I'm quoting them. Donald Trump opened his rally at the Arnold Palmer Airport in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, with a 10-minute monologue about the golfer for which the airport is named. Now, that's all it said about what Donald Trump said about more than golf when it comes to Arnold Palmer. People began on a variety of social media platforms attacking Michael Gold for sane washing what Trump had said. Michael Gold went on one platform and basically said, write a letter to the editor because here, this is his quote. Quote, I filed something that included the thing you mentioned as omitted, graphic details about Arnold Palmer, but I'm not given the power to publish what I say. And then he told people to write a letter to the editor. Now that's pretty remarkable, right? Because we've been in broad strokes for months, if not more, years, complaining about the press, complaining about what they're not saying, sane washing, any number of things that we've been talking about. But we've been, painting with a broad brush. And now here we have a writer, a reporter saying, you know what? I wrote what he said in some way, and I wasn't allowed to include it. That's to me kind of remarkable and also really interesting that he did that. Now, apparently, um, later that day, um, let me find what they did. Later in the day, the Times had a longer piece by Michael Gold, and it was headlined At a Pennsylvania Rally, Trump Descends to New Levels of Vulgarity, and it included a verbatim version of the Arnold Palmer comments that former President Trump had made. Okay, so when I first saw that story, I thought, what I among the things I liked about it was that when people spoke up and protested about the sane washing, it it was called out and something changed. But then there was a second story this last week, having to do with the LA Times, having to do with the editor of the editorial page of the LA Times. Her name is Marielle Garza, and she resigned. And she resigned her post because she was not allowed. The editorial board decided they wanted to endorse Kamala Harris, and the owner of the LA Times said that they could not. And she told the Columbia Journalism Review, I am resigning because I want to make it clear that I am not okay with us being silent. In dangerous times, honest people need to stand up. This is how I'm standing up. And not long after that, two more editorial board members resigned. Robert Greene, who won a Pulitzer Prize in 2021 for editorials on criminal justice reform. Karen Klein, who has written editorials about education and the environment. Okay, and then apparently several thousand people canceled their subscription to the LA Times. Okay, so there again, we have someone from inside the paper. In her case, it sounds as though it's the owner of the LA Times who, although the paper routinely endorses a candidate for president, did not want this done and told them that they couldn't. And again, she stood up and gave up her job to say something. Okay, so first of all, we need to re-examine the broad brush with which we've been sweeping the press, which is not to say that there are reporters out there who are sane washing what Trump says, or not to say that there aren't any number of ways in which some reporters are doing some things that fall under that category, but not all of them, right? Which we should have been saying all along. But what happened this week is two people basically said, my boss is not letting me say what I want to say. That's pretty shocking. And that's pretty shocking at this particular moment in time when, and as a historian, I don't say this easily, at a particularly tense, meaningful, eventful, important moment in time when honestly democracy is on the line. I'm not being exaggerating here. It is what I believe to be true, and I think that is indeed true. At that moment, with all of this around us and all of the rhetoric and all of the language, and now all of the people finally in the last 2 weeks, Republicans coming out and saying, you know what? Maybe he can be described as a fascist. With all of this happening at this moment in time, for the press to decide, or at least for some owners, maybe some editors, some reporters to decide that this is a moment to be silent or hold back, that's an amazingly bold statement with silence and inaction. You can't, at moments of crisis, if you decide not to act, that can be a very, very strong statement and a very, very strong action, depending on the circumstances. So I'm going to come back to that. I want to go back in time a little bit and talk a little bit about the press and politics, and then bring us right back to the current moment, because, of course, history matters. Um, Okay, so oddly enough, this stuff happened this week. I was already thinking about it, and then, as luck would have it, in my undergraduate seminar, we were talking about the press and about how politicians and editors were using the press politically in the late 18th and very early 19th centuries. And, it was a reminder of a number of preparing for class, reminded me of a number of quotes from, the founder blog, from the founding folk about the significance of the press, particularly when it comes to politics, but even more generally in the United States. James Madison, really early on, I don't have his precise quote here, but he says something along the lines of that the press, circulating newspapers, news being spread around, and it's not accidental that when the government is launched, one of the first things that Congress does is allow newspaper editors to send newspapers to each other for free to help the circulation of news. Madison says that the circulation of news contracts the bounds of the country, meaning, and this was something that concerned them at the time, the country is so big and spreads out over such a distance. How in the world can we make that work? And particularly in a Republican form of government, small r, Republican form of government, when the people govern, how do you have that kind of government when it's so spread out. People at the time argued republics work when people are close together and can inform each other and are within proximity of each other. It's a logical thing. Madison is saying, well, here's one way in which we can combat the strangeness of having a country that's so widespread and help it come together in at least the information to do through the press. So he says the circulation of news is going to contract the bounds of the country. He at times almost talked about the press as being a part of government, as being kind. He didn't say it's a fourth branch, but he did talk about it as being, in a sense, a functional part of government. Thomas Jefferson, um, early in his political career in the national government, at one point he is concerned about what kinds of press can get into or not into the House or the Senate. That was a lot of discussion too early on. Do we let the press in? Do we not let the press in? The press was not in the Senate for part of the 1790s. The Diary of William Maclay, which I quote all the time on here, is one of the few sources that we have of exactly what was going on that level in the Senate. Jefferson said at the time, I want to say it was the late 18th century, yeah, I think it was when he first takes government. Now I'm not absolutely sure, but at any rate, early, he says that Congress, without the press keeping an eye on them, would be absolutely corrupt. You need a press to watch, to have eyes on what is happening, to report what is happening, right? So again, another kind of way of talking about the press being almost a part of government, but certainly a vital part of government, a vital part of nationhood. Now, um, clearly, they're all assuming, rightfully, that the press has power. It is thus no surprise that when there is a war, or more accurately, a quasi-war, in 1798 with France, and the Federalists are in power, and they can feel that the nation is drifting a little bit more small d democratically. And so now here they have a moment where they can act boldly because it's a quasi-war, time of war. You can do some things you can't do otherwise. One of the things the Federalists choose to do is pass the Sedition Act. What they say, the logic of what they do, and I wrote an article about this at some point. I think it's called The Cultural Logic of the Sedition Act, because the cultural logic of the Sedition Act was, you know what, this government is really weak. Like, no one necessarily respects it. We're like, 8 years old, 9 years old. And all we have going for it at the moment is the reputation of the people with power. And if we let people attack the character and reputation of the people in power, the government's kind of going to have no power at all within the country. That's their cultural logic. Of course, their political logic was, oh, good, we can crush the opposition press, which is what they promptly wanted to do. So it's a mix of both, but the political aspect of it clearly is leading the way. That this gives them a chance to suppress voices that are opposing them. And oh, goody, isn't that a great thing to do? Okay. Because the press has power. I actually, in my lecture course yesterday, talked about another. So the Federalists, because they're less comfortable with democracy, not so comfortable Sedition Act, many of them, most of them are comfortable with, not so comfortable with appealing to the public in newspapers on an ongoing basis. And I say that because there's an amazing Hamilton letter, which I quoted in my lecture course yesterday, in which he muses on what happened in the election of 1800 and why Jefferson won. And one of the things he pegs that on is the press. It's like, look, he says that the Republicans, the Jeffersonian Republicans, appealed to and he puts it in all capital letters, vanity of the people by telling them that they were important. That's what they were doing. They were pandering to the public. They were appealing to their vanity. That's not what we should be doing. So he's being a Federalist. We do what we do, and if they don't like us, they vote us out, and that's how it should work. But he then says, you know what, though? Maybe temporarily, we need more newspapers because that worked really well for them. And if we want to get power back, we darn well better have more newspapers. He also promotes the creation, and maybe this is for another episode, of Christian constitutional societies to use Christianity to get the Federalists back in power. No one takes his idea, but it's kind of amazing. But at any rate, for the moment, let's stick with the press. So he acknowledges, wow, the power, the political power of the press. I don't like it, but temporarily we have to abide by it. When you look at the press itself and how it's behaving, or let's say editors and how they are behaving in the early years of the government, you see the press gradually understand or grow into or take advantage of the very loud voice that it can have. And this is particularly true concerning George Washington, because when he takes office, of course, he's like, in a sense, already the father of his country. People don't dare to criticize George Washington. He's a man who probably enjoyed really not being criticized. And eventually, the press begins to criticize him, particularly regarding France and his decision to be neutral towards France. And then you begin to get newspapers, the National Gazette, founded in part by Jefferson and Madison as an opposition newspaper, opposition to the Gazette of the United States, which supported the government, Washington, Hamilton, all the way. um, the National Gazette and other newspapers begin to say things unfriendly and actually even snarky about George Washington. He really, really, really doesn't like that. I'm sure I've talked about this before on History Matters. He loses his temper. Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, comes into a cabinet meeting, and we get this from Thomas Jefferson's notes of what was happened at this cabinet meeting. Um, Henry Knox comes in with a cartoon being sort of hawked on the street that shows Washington. I think he's being guillotined or some such thing in kind of a mocking way about the French Revolution. And Knox is just like, look at this goofy thing they're selling on the street. And George Washington loses like really loses his temper and goes into a full-fledged rant, saying things like, I haven't regretted taking a second term as president but once, and that's every moment since I accepted a second term as president. It's like they think I want to be king of the world. I don't want to be king of the world. I just want to go home. And he like rants. And Jefferson records all of this. I know I've said this before because this is one of my favorite things, lines. I have actual favorite lines from documents in this period. This is one. Jefferson records the whole rant of Washington against the press and Philip Freneau, that rascal Freneau, trying to get on his nerves. And then Jefferson writes, a silence ensued. Some difficulty continuing our conversation. I just think that so captures exactly what that room felt like after a screaming fit from George Washington. Everyone's like, uh-oh, now what do we do? The larger point there, besides the fact that I like that anecdote, is that the press is realizing that they have that kind of power and that they can criticize, and that, in a sense, they should criticize if they feel that something needs to be said. Something that I write about in my most recent book, The Field of Blood, Violence in Congress and the Road to Civil War, has a similar moment in which you can see, in a sense, two reporters realize the real power of who they are and what they have literally at their hands, what they can do. There's a congressman who is threatening them. They are saying things in the newspaper about him he doesn't like. And he comes apparently into Congress one day with a quote unquote big stick. And both reporters understand the big stick is meant for them, based on what he's been saying, that this guy is now essentially threatening to beat them, because that's what you do with people who are beneath you. You cane them, you beat them. So that's what he's threatening. And the reporters, and they're writing all of this out, right? The reporters say he has an alarming physique, this congressman. So they're like, he's a big guy, and now he has a big stick. But these two reporters realize something really important. They don't have to report about this guy at all. They can just eliminate his existence. And this is what they do. They stop reporting him. He vanishes from Congress. His constituents don't know what he's doing. Poof, he's gone. And ultimately, the congressman apologizes because these two guys have just shown, you know what? You need us. You need us, and without us, you don't exist. So you can see in this early American-ish period, the press figuring out its power, politicians figuring out in ways both good and to them bad, the power of the press, the fact that it's interwoven with the actual working of the government, and obviously beyond that, what it is that the public knows of the working of the government, which in a sense you could say is part of our political system. Public awareness, public opinion of what is going on in government. That is part of a democratic system of government. That is, as I've said a million times, I know here on History Matters, a distinctive thing about this government when it was launched, as opposed to monarchies, which are in the rest of the world, a distinctive thing about this particular democratic republic was that it was grounded on public opinion to an extreme degree. The public was supposed to be guiding it. So an informed public is important. So this, for early-ish American politicians and public, they understand this. They don't know what it means. And some of what I'm describing here is the process of figuring out whose voices are loudest, whose voices can be eliminated, what can these voices do. This early period, in many ways, and this is part of what I love about this period, they're testing boundaries. They're learning about how loud their voice can be on both the politician sides, the editor sides, and the public's side too. Some of what we also talk about in my class is the public learning about the power of protest and how loud a voice they can have. So the public is supposed to be informed. The public is supposed to have a voice. That's the essence. Public opinion, us, is the essence of this government. And the press, obviously, is crucial to that. So in that sense, it's kind of built in to the system. This is all true, despite the fact that the press, for a lot of its history, certainly in this early period in the United States, it was not assumed it was going to be objective. Some newspapers would say, we're here to like print everything, arguments on both sides, but they wouldn't necessarily do that. So a lot of these newspapers, some of them were called organs of the administration, because whoever was president kind of controlled the newspaper or had a special relationship with the editor of the newspaper. Politicians often were pooling their money to create newspapers. So these were political tools. They weren't stepping up to be what we at least once ideally imagined was an absolute objective press. That was not a goal in this period. What we're seeing this week, and it was interesting, in teaching about the press in the past, I found myself talking about objectivity and how that wasn't a goal and how that became a goal. And then I found myself a little stymied in how to talk about the present. Because some of what we're seeing, particularly the sane washing, that's problematic in this moment. Is that objective? I mean, we could talk about this. We should talk about how people are feeling and thinking, maybe more importantly, about this moment. But I suddenly found myself challenged in talking about the press in a way that felt true to the press and what it could be, but aware of the fact that I think right now there are some serious flaws and liabilities and failings. Again, I'm not going to say on the part of the press because I think it's part of the press, but still, when it becomes challenging for me to talk about something like protest or the press, that's only been a recent phenomenon for me. That's a way of getting hit in the face with precisely where we are politically. Okay. So my larger point here is some of what we're seeing, and this is true in the case of the LA Times editorial board, people are resigning, and the owner of the LA Times said, I don't want you to say that you endorse Harris. That's an owner for whatever reason, whether he supports Donald Trump, whether he's hedging his bets, whether he thinks it'll be better for the newspaper and for its profits down the road if Trump becomes president, for them not to take a side. I can't say. He's said sort of general things about this, but he hasn't come out with like an absolute statement about why he did what he did. In the case of the New York Times, again, I cannot tell you why that decision was made to eliminate the really, as they later said, vulgar uh, conversation, speechifying about Arnold Palmer's private parts that go in with the mix of things that former President Trump is doing that are less than rational. I don't know why that was decided. I don't know if it was the editor who decided that. I don't know if it was someone above the editor who decided that. But in one way or another, in both of these cases, it's not the reporter, it's someone higher up deciding for one reason or another that their paper and particularly these reporters should not take sides. Now, one could say, an objective press should be reporting what happens and not taking sides. But the fact is, some of the press is not reporting what actually happens. And in fact, that the New York Times article, blog post first did not include what was said. It just eliminated it, kind of like, the reporters in the 19th century Congress, just eliminating the member of Congress. We're in territory where silence is action, right? We're in territory where, as of this week, silence is being made visible by some writers and reporters who are pointing their finger at it and saying, I would like to say something about this, but I am being stopped. Now, there are a lot of directions we can go with this. In some ways, as I was typing up my notes this morning, one can't help but think about the oligarchic nature of where we are right now, where very rich people, very, very rich people seem to feel even more entitled than they typically feel to control things for their benefit, to silence things, to say things, to own things, to do things that are pretty obviously not in sync with the democratic mode of politics. And I'm not talking about all wealthy people. There are a few key ones that I'm talking about. So don't take that statement as a broad, you know, get the oligarchy. I just think there are some billionaires who are feeling the moment and feeling entitled to do what they want to do in this moment. And some of that obviously can be at play with what we're seeing in the press. So in that sense, what we're seeing can be truly reflective of the moment that we're in. But I mention it because, I always say that when something makes you emotional, pause for a minute and consider someone wants you to be emotional, right? Pause and consider, is someone saying this thing to get me to rant? Are they quote unquote rage harvesting? Right? Do they just want people angry so that they can get attention or they can promote something? Pause and consider the purpose of the thing that's making you mad before you respond. Well, this is kind of the opposite of that. Now, what I'm saying is if you know vaguely that something out there happened that's discomforting, that you want to know more about, you're not sure if it happened and you can't find out because no one really is reporting, and you want to just investigate and get a quote so that you know for yourself what's going on, and there's silence. Silence is not necessarily about getting you to react. Silence is about getting you to not react, right? Silence is about getting you to sit down and shut up. Silence is about having you not be aware of what's going on, not understand what's going on, and respond again in the way that someone wants you to respond, but in a sense, it's harder to track than something that's obviously trying to provoke rage. So I guess I'm adding a proviso. I'm adding something to my normal pause when you get upset. We live in times where you just have to pause and consider seriously what it is you're seeing and reading and thinking. Now, that holds true in a lot of ways. So, someone says there was some kind of something floating around out there. I'm not even going to repeat it about something that Donald Trump did. And it was, as far as I can tell, like just a rumor floating around. And, it behooves us. I think last week, maybe I said behooves here. I said it somewhere last week and it made me so happy. It behooves us before repeating that kind of stuff to find out to the best of our ability if it's true. But in this climate that we're in, it's not only that there's inaccuracy floating around, it's not only that there's deliberate disinformation and misinformation, it's that there's silence. It's that there's sane washing. So rage harvesting and sane washing someday they're just going to be in the dictionary and they're just from this moment in time for good reason. But regardless, I suppose some of what I'm saying here is watch, and it's going to sound insane, watch for the silence. If someone says something shocking was said about Arnold Palmer at a Trump event, don't just repeat it, but go find some evidence of it, some actual evidence of it. And if it's true, if you can find actual evidence of it, then yeah, it's worth pointing out. It's worth speaking up. As I was saying to my class in general, and as I sort of referred to a moment ago, our voice matters. The public, we the people, more than anything else, in the heart and soul of our form of government. It does. And when we actually come together and talk to each other and engage with each other and come to terms with what's going on and together come up with a way to state our feelings. And I'm not talking about violence. Oh, good. My internet connection is unstable, folks. So if I vanish, I'm going to come right back. At any rate, if we come together and speak out, if we come together and act together, not with violence, but by stating our views, maybe withholding our business, that works. That matters. The people together speaking out, speaking up, it matters. And that's part of why some things aren't being put in the press so that we won't respond to it. We won't speak about it. We won't notice it. It'll just go away. So be aware of what you're seeing and be aware of what you're not seeing and think about it and consider it. How to get you to think about things that aren't there, I don't have the answer to that. But what I can say is at this particular moment, the silence is screaming at us. The silence by some aspects of the press about what's happening, about what's being said, about the rhetoric being used. The silence about it is stunningly irresponsible. We're hearing a little bit more about it now. Why? Because important people are speaking up. Important Republicans are saying, you know what? Hey, I'm going to vote for Harris because I don't like what's happening there. And I'm not saying the entire press is stunningly irresponsible, but some people in the press making these decisions to not say things that are happening, that's irresponsible at this particular moment. And they may think it goes unnoticed, silence goes unnoticed. I don't think in the short term or the long term it will. I think people recognize it and are increasingly recognizing it for what it is. Okay, I'm 5 minutes over. I'm going to stop. I'm going to close my notes. So here, yes, thank you, Carolee Mugg. So here's the thing about the mugs. I don't have a lot of mugs in New Haven. And so I decided today that this is going to be my thing and I'm enjoying being in New Haven, so I'm not complaining about New Haven. However, I would really like to get to live in my new apartment in New York City sometime. So as long as I can't be in my apartment in New York City, I'm just sticking with Mr. Grumpy.
We
So
like Mr. Grumpy.
I kind of love Mr. Grumpy. So I kind of don't. I really went looking for mugs in the cabinets here, and it's pretty slim pickings, folks. But this so fit. First of all, the fact that I just can't get in my apartment yet, number one, and number two, just my mood right now about everything, in particular about the press, uh, parts of the press, key players of the press. Mr. Grumpy, he's back. So okay. Let me open chat. Thank you for appreciating Mr. Grumpy. I see little laughing
Yep.
emoji
Yep.
going.
Mr.
Yeah.
Grumpy's definitely got some fans. All right. We have tons of questions. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Um, Sydney, who went hiking this morning, apparently. Sydney asks, how has social media affected the spread of misinformation? Do you think it's led to the rise of misinformation? Why or why not?
Well, it has. I'm going to repeat something I've said because maybe some people haven't heard me say it before, and because I think it's important. So I repeat myself. And people know I love to talk about technology. I'm going to make it brief. But the fact of the matter is, democracy is a conversation between people with power and the people who give it to them. It's a conversation. And any technology that shapes that conversation shapes democracy. In this case, social media, for sure. It is spreading information all over the place. It's kind of a wild west of information right now where, platforms are coming and going. Which one should we go to? Um, so yeah, do I think that social media is allowing, even encouraging misinformation and disinformation and just out and out bold-faced lies? Yeah, it is. And we're still kind of in a phase where we're like, AI, what do we do about that? Like, I don't even know who, big question mark. Yeah, it certainly is affecting us in this moment, and it's hard to know what to do about it. We don't have that answer yet. So that's a really good question because the answer, oh, there we go. Types of misinformation and disinformation. See, I have to say, if you're new here, look at in the chat because people will post all kinds of links that are wonderful. But at any rate, the answer to the question is, yeah, it is having an impact. It really is. Uh, and the historian part of my brain finds this interesting. The American citizen part of my brain is truly not thrilled, but it's a good question.
And Tim Boz kind of has a follow-up to that one. And I don't know if you're new to us, Tim. I don't remember your name being in the Q&A. Um, so if you are new, welcome and thank you for the question. He says, has ubiquitous social media diminished the power of the press? It seems the role of the press as a guardrail in democracy has been diminished by the owners dictating their personal interests.
Well, it's interesting. We are in a transitional moment with the media in some ways, not just because of social media. Already, we were watching local newspapers collapse. We are watching fewer people. I don't have figures at my disposal, but fewer people rely on newspapers, supposedly. Look at things like, I don't know, TikTok or whatever to get their information. So we're looking at a moment where the place of newspapers and the form of newspapers, where we get our news and what our news is really in transformation. And that's, as I suggested a moment ago, pretty major in a democratic form of government. So yeah, I think. We don't know how this is going to turn out. It makes sense that this is a little crazy making and that this is politically potentially dangerous, but we are in something of a transition moment. And in this transition moment, with newspapers financially struggling and trying to figure out how to regain their power, in a sense, it's not surprising that some owners of some newspapers are scrambling to figure out how to claim power or protect power and hedge their bets in this election because one candidate swears revenge against media outlets that come out against him. Who the heck knows? But because it's a transition moment, we are also seeing bolder and louder attempts. And again, not necessarily reporters, but sometimes higher ups to control and shape the narrative to the current moment, logistically speaking, not news speaking, if that makes sense.
All right, our good friend Linda Krauss from down in Florida asks, in addition to the LA Times resignations and the New York Times journalist speaking out, she's twice heard on NPR that FCC regulator um, and TFG, I'm not sure TFG's role in attacking it. Somebody help me in the chat with acronym. The former guy. Thank you. And the former guy's role in attacking it, I knew they would know. That's why I depend on the chat. Have you noticed this to be a recent shift in the news, calling out his dangerous tendencies that have been madly quiet for 8 years?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, yeah. In the last 2 weeks before the election, suddenly some people are speaking up. On the one hand, I'm very happy to see it. On the other hand, really? Really? And we're still seeing, like doom scrolling is at a new low because we're still seeing, let's talk about Harris's clothes or Harris used a word improperly. Well, what we know is going on the other side is going on the other side, right? We're still seeing some of the nonsense that we've been seeing. We are not seeing actual reporting about what's going on both sides. So I don't know 2 weeks left. People are speaking up. Is that enough time? I don't know. Who knows? Who knows if people will be swayed? I don't know. I actually think that there are a good number of undecided people. And I actually do think, and I guess I'm always a little optimistic, that some of them are going to be swayed and that what's happening now matters. But the fact that they waited till 2 weeks before the election, rather than at least a little earlier calling it out, can you imagine? I mean, if something had been said, if people had come out and said what they were thinking boldly, loudly earlier, for better and worse, we might have had a different candidate coming from the Republicans. Now, I'm not saying that would be better or worse, but we would be in a very different place. You'd have to judge what that means. But we don't. We aren't in that place because people just watched what was happening, jumped on the bandwagon, or just watched the wagon go by and didn't stand up and say things. And initially, right, we kept saying, like, why are you waiting for your book to come out? Like, really, you knew this when you were in office and you didn't say anything, but now you have a book coming out and suddenly it's news. Now we're like, almost beyond that. I don't have a count, and I should have. Um, how many former members of Trump's staff now have come out and essentially said, yeah, you can call him a fascist now, like in the last 10 days? I don't know. It's a lot. And the problem with the word fascist, like the problem I've talked about this, I think last week, about using Hitler and using civil war. The problem with the word fascist, I think, is that it masks things because people don't absolutely know what it means. So you say fascist, and people are like, yeah, whatever, fascist, it's bad, whatever. I wish that people were not throwing it around so much without an explanation. I wish there were more obvious ways without saying just like Hitler or fascist. I think ists and isms mask things because people don't necessarily know what they are. They think they do, they don't. And I think we're also in this moment where suddenly everyone is people on the right are saying, yeah, he's a fascist, he's a fascist. If you went out on the street and asked people what that means, I would bet a lot of people don't absolutely know. Bad guy. I don't know. You tell me, but that's my sense, is that the word doesn't have a lot of meaning. Just like earlier on, I said, I don't think people know what democracy is, really. They don't know what it is. I don't think people know necessarily what fascism is. That's not helping us right now. So, 2 weeks where we are, there we are.
So I'm going to combine Emma the tour guide. And if you're new, Emma lives in New York, so we call her Emma the tour guide because that's her job.
Because
Um,
she's a tour guide.
she's a tour guide. Emma and then John Howe from Boise are both asking about. I think John called it sane washing, but basically both of them had a question about going into the former president's rants, how lately he's been ranting on TV and straying off topic, and how when they report on it, they don't come out and just say it's lies, or they don't come out and say
No.
he appears to not be able to hold on to a thought. So it's not calling him out, but it's also kind of making it sound not as bad as it really is.
Right. Well, right. Saying, and you have seen a little bit more people like offering like verbatim transcriptions of what he says. But again, typically it's people who we already know their politics and we already know they don't like Trump. And so first of all, I don't think people are going to read it. And secondly, they might not trust it, even though it is a verbatim transcript. Yeah, I think that that's true, that not actually saying he could not finish a sentence or he did not finish a sentence completely within 45 minutes or whatever. That if you make an observation, he did not finish a sentence, that's an observation. You could then have the transcript and show it for what it is. But yeah, so it's not sane washing. And the word lie. So I've been very sensitive to this from very early on because the word lie and coward in the period that I write about, you never say unless you really mean it and are willing to get shot in a duel, right? You do not say liar or coward. So when we all began this trip that we're on and people started saying whatever they're saying, in the place of he lied, part of me was like, yeah, they don't want to say lie. Like lie, first of all, suggests motive. You did it on purpose, right? So you're not saying he just, right, misspeaking. Thank you, Miriam. He misspoke, he whatever. Yeah, that's like, oops, I misspoke. Lie means suggests you're deliberately doing it. It's an act. And that's why in the late 18th, maybe first half of the 19th century, if you called someone a liar, they could challenge you to a duel because you were getting at their fundamental character. A liar is a person not to be trusted. A liar is a person of no character. A liar is a person that you shouldn't do business with. A liar, maybe only the only thing lower than a liar is a coward. But both of them are beyond the pale, right? Just people you're not supposed to deal with. So lie or liar, that's serious. And initially, no one was saying it, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Lie is always the word. And when people started saying, why aren't they saying lie or liar? I kept thinking, well, I know one reason. That's a really serious word that suggests intention, right? At this point, I don't know why. At this point, it's like it's not as though no one's using the word in general. It's not as though they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, is not a lie. And it's not as though we know that at this point, right? Falsehood. There are all kinds of ways to say this. Someone just said falsehood is an equivalent. Deb. Yeah, falsehood too. It's kind of nicer and sweeter, right? He uttered a falsehood. Like it exists out here. Oh, look, it's a falsehood. I think I shall give it words. Oh, there goes the falsehood. Like somehow you don't own a falsehood. If you lie, you're a liar. So yeah, the fact that people are wary of that word means something because it suggests in a way that falsehood doesn't. It's quite deliberate.
Okay. Our good friend Dave Airy asks, the Senate Intelligence Committee, led by Republicans currently, and the Mueller report both concluded Russia influenced the 2016 election. Trump, Fox, and Murdoch and Bill Barr spun this as a hoax. How should the press have addressed the fire hose of misinformation or disinformation, and how problematic was MAGA takeover of the party to the collapse of the power of the press to inform citizens?
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I just want to say one thing because it's a really good point. Kay said the word, bless you, the word liar might be slander and subject to legal recourse. That's actually very much worth noting. I don't know for a fact, and I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but it is true that some of what is going on also has to do with not wanting to face legal repercussions. So that's important to add in. Okay, so to the question that was just asked, say it again. Repeat the question.
They talk about the Mueller report and Barr downplaying the Russian influence in the last election. And they're asking how problematic was the MAGA takeover of the party to the collapse of the power of the press now to inform citizens.
Well, some of what we've been watching happen in the case of big, long reports uh, is how to condense them down in a way that people know what's in the big reports. So part of what I think we've been seeing is information that maybe in another time the press might have been more effective in reporting on and stating what it said. And now you get huge documents, um, 1,000-page plans for 2025 that no one really knows what's in them. And some people are better, at least, at calling out parts of them. So part of the problem is the press is so far, except for some outlets are, um, not doing such a great job of straight reporting the contents of things, right? This is what's in it. In the case of Russia and the hoax, again, we're in this time where, hoax actually on the part of Trump is another way of saying lie, right? It's a hoax. It's not really happening. Um, the press, generally speaking, has not been stepping up. And again, very generally speaking, because I don't want to hammer on the press because they're important, and what I'm saying doesn't apply to everyone. So I hate to do this, but in some cases, right, that the press saying, well, it actually isn't a hoax because there's a report and aspects of it are supported by evidence. And here's some evidence. There were press outlets that did that. But I think in this moment, with where the press is and what they have and haven't been doing, and just with the fact that we can't always tell what's real or what's not, which, way back before this era, when people said you can't have democracy if people can't agree on facts, now you're experiencing why that's true. I think for all of these reasons, um, we know what should be happening. We know that the press is in a distinctive kind of a place right now for a whole bunch of reasons, and maybe reporters and owners in a slightly different place. I don't know. But at this moment, I don't know if we have shared expectations about what the press is supposed to be doing, or we know what they're supposed to be doing, but we don't actually have a shared sense of what should be coming at us now. We all are like, report, give us facts, give us reporting, investigate things, right? We're all howling that in one way or another. The fact that we're howling that means we're not seeing what we think we should have. And that's where we are. So it is kind of a maybe, I don't know if it's a transformational moment in this sense, or just a, I'm going to say a contingency moment where the what's happening in the press is so contingent, so unpredictable, so up in the air and unstable, that we know what we want, and that's kind of where we are. I know that's a very roundabout answer to this question, but I actually think, again, as a historian, it's fascinating to watch what's happening. And this goes all the way back. It's not related to what this question was, but and I know I've mentioned this before, when there was like a protest in, I believe, the House about gun laws, wanting stronger gun laws, and they turned off the cameras in the House. And it was like, going all night. They turned off the cameras so that Democratic members of Congress pulled out their phones and they were broadcasting what was happening on their phones. And I stayed up till like 0 o'clock in the morning because what we were watching was a transformative moment in the press and with technology. We were watching politicians say, you know what? We don't need your stinking cameras, right? We got our phones. So here, public, we want you to see this, so we're going to put it on our phones. That I had to witness that because that years from now, when people are writing about this moment, if I were a historian in the future, I would point to that moment as a moment when technology and news and extremism of various sorts took a shift, and it's not going to be immediate, but that was a dramatic moment in which a possibility was made obvious in a way that it hadn't been before. So, it's another way of saying, if we weren't in this particular political moment that we're in, this would all be fascinating and exciting. We're in this moment, and so unfortunately, democracy is in the crosshairs of what happens. But it's all part of the same package as to what makes up this moment.
Yeah. I feel like when the two Justins got dispelled from the Tennessee legislature, they did the same thing. People pulled out their phone
Yeah.
because it wasn't being covered, and
Yes.
that's how a lot of us
Yes.
found out in real time.
Well, and speaking as far as racism too, right? even before in this sort of realm of mainstream politics, it had a huge impact when, you know, black men and women were being treated unfairly by the law, and people there could say, okay, now it's on camera. Got my camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
That
George Floyd.
right. Right.
Okay,
So
so James Dennis asks, I read in First Principles by Thomas Ricks that the founders viewed corruption as one thing about government that could not be solved with law. I haven't seen that discussed elsewhere. Could you share your thoughts if you think that is or is not true?
so I would say, and I always warn against the founder blob, but I will say, generally speaking, the founders didn't agree on corruption and what to do with it. And I'm trying to think of there's an example, a specific example of that. Um, Hamilton and Jefferson. Hamilton, and actually, and John Adams is in the mix too. There's a dinner party at Jefferson's house when both Hamilton and Jefferson are in Washington's cabinet. And I believe it's Adams who says, um, t remove the corruption from the British government, and it would be the finest government on the face of the earth. And Hamilton says, and we know this because Jefferson wrote it down. Hamilton says, with the corruption, it's the finest government on the face of the earth. The corruption is like part of human nature. It's who we are, and it's not going to go away. And corruption greases the wheels of politics, right? It's like part of who we are. You got to like accept the corruption. Jefferson writes this down because he's like, you internally like with the corruption. Hamilton's idea is, we're not going to be able to remove corruption. And that's, generally Hamilton's ideas about government, why he wanted a strong government. And he talks about this some during the Constitutional Convention. People are going to be people. We're not going to be, this is a Madisonian. We're not going to be angels. If we were angels, he wouldn't need government, as Madisonian. Hamilton is saying people are people and they're going to be selfish and they're going to be corrupt and they're going to do wrong things. So what you need to do is make a government strong enough to channel that into the public good. Now that's easier said than done, but that's part of Hamilton's logic. Um, Jefferson, in some ways, he didn't think that we could eliminate corruption, but he did believe at some fundamental level that many Americans, if they listened to their instincts, would choose the right path. Like the people, the plowman and the professor with all of his or her knowledge is always going to go the wrong way. The plowman, following his instinct, will stay truer to virtue and truth. So I think, I don't think anyone thought you could solve corruption and make it go away. But I think Hamilton thought it was a part of government, and that would be not something that everybody agreed with. They weren't, it's easy to look at that generation and think they were stupidly naive. When I talk about how they didn't think that there would be organized political parties, I think sometimes the response to that is to think, what a bunch of num-nums. Like, how could are they naive? They don't think people are going to, well, it's not that they didn't think there'd be opposition. It's not that they didn't think that people would be banging up against each other. It's not that they didn't think a lot of bad things. But they didn't see two organized blobs nationally banging up against each other. They weren't naive, but they were willing to envision something a little different from what came before, and they liked to assume that whatever the heck they were doing in the United States was going to be better.
Joanna's frozen on my screen. I'm not sure if anybody else, is she frozen on y'all's? Oh no. Hopefully she'll log back in. Okay. Let me try texting her. Okay, guys, I texted her. I think she's logging out and logging back in. Sorry about that. Chat amongst yourselves. Yeah, she got so energetic with her answer. You're right, Kay. She blew off the internet. Y'all are cracking me up with your chat comments. Claire can edit this part out, right? Okay, you're on mute.
I'm back.
Yay, there she is.
Yay. Okay. I changed. Don't even ask. At any rate, okay. I'm sorry. We almost made it to the whole show without losing.
Almost did.
I tried to do it upstairs, but the lighting is so bad. Anyway, I will stop. I know I was in mid rant, and I don't remember what I was ranting about. But we are 2 minutes past. So, at any rate, I will end the show. Let me explain to people what's going to happen. There's still a good number of people here, so they didn't all run away when we broke down. So this, what normally happens at this point is we go to the after party. What that means is we no longer record what we're doing here, but we can be, because we're not recorded, even freer and easier in our conversation than we were during the regular episode. If you are watching us through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and you will be in the after party. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too, poof, will be in the after party. Particularly at this moment in time when we're like 2 weeks away, man. I thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy. Engage in that conversation with as many people as you can, just reminding them of the moment we're in and how important it is to vote and even to vote early. Thank you for being here. 239.
I think
I remembered. I never remember the episode number. It's like 239th episode. Thank you for being here for all of this. We're going to need to keep being here after the election, folks. Nothing is going to be like poof solved with the election. Some things will change, but not everything. So, at any rate, thank you for being here for this. And oh, Sydney is going. Sydney is our favorite student among the mix. Um, at any rate, thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in democracy. You can, have said this many times before too, you can do this yourself. You can get people together and have a conversation through Zoom about politics. And maybe these 2 weeks are the moment you can do it. It matters. One to one, it matters. It really, really does. I can say that having just been in Michigan. Anyway, okay. So, I don't know. I just saw Hamilton go across the bottom of my screen. I don't know what that was. At any rate, thank you to NCHE. A thank you to Annie, my wonderful partner in crime, and to Claire, and to John, and to Jessica, and to everybody who's here for being here in this particular political moment. Folks, years from now, when you think back to this moment in time, the fact that we came together all of these times to talk about what was going on in a clear-minded, responsible way, you should be proud of that. You really should. This is civic engagement, even just being here, hoping that my internet connection stays. Um, Even this is more than a lot of people are doing. It matters, and you should be proud that on a continuing basis you have done this. Okay. Um, we now are going to go, it's 5 minutes past. I guess we now can go to the after party.